Indeed. Welcome everybody to the special joint City Council planning commission meeting agenda, February 26th. Do I have, please?
Councilmember Jensen.
Present.
Councilmember Orbach. Present. Councilmember Morgan.
Here.
Vice Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Christensen.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Howard.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Pugh.
Here.
And Chair Weston.
Here.
Planning Commissioner FD is absent tonight.
Right. All right. Would everybody join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Additions and deletion to the agenda.
Staff review changes to the agenda this evening.
Additional materials.
Staff has an additional materials this evening.
Oral communication by the members of the public. Thank you. Brings us to item number 5, general government. Item 8.
All right. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, chair, members of the planning commission, thank you guys for coming this evening. This is something we try to do for the start of every 10-year term. We usually get to it a little bit earlier in the year. So we had a lot of challenges and information on council, so we're getting at this point. We have a whole presentation lined up this evening. I am not to the bulk of talking. I'll go to that scene here. But I will be presenting a few of the items and always here to answer any questions that might come up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over because our city attorney is kick us off.
Good evening, everyone. You hear me? Okay. I really have the most interesting part of the presentation. What everyone wants to talk about. I am the city attorney, by the way, and met most of you, certainly the council members, some of the planning commissioners. My name is Samantha. My firm, Williams and Swanson, serves as the city attorney for Capitola. I'm sort of the face of the city attorney team. I'm the city attorney. You might have been in touch with Tom Rupert, who essentially served as the assistant city attorney for Mark Trina, who works well with the city as well. We handle most individual issues. Very unique. What should I do? Okay. Does that work? I don't. It's closer. Is it work? Can you hear me? Jerry? Okay. Okay, this feels weird to me. It doesn't sound like it's working to me, so if it's not, you can't do that. Anyway, my firm is on all of the city of Sweden, or works. So I am over some of the primary options that the council is to deal with. For firms with city attorneys, there's so many, and so a lot of the issues that come up we have dealt with and litigated, and so I can talk to you about it as well. We have an hour and a half and for this training. Julia, how much time do you need? I went over this training.
I'll do my best.
I don't want to help too much, you know.
I think like 5 to 10 minutes.
Oh gosh, it won't take that long. We'll leave plenty of time for questions.
I think this staff will be probably 30 minutes total.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that you should know, you likely, some of you already have done if you want to before training online, because you are an elected or appointed official, and you presumably are eligible for compensation, or you get reimbursement, or required to do 2 hours of ethics training that has a whole host of questions. This is not that. So you'll do that, and if you have questions about that, please give me a call. I will be doing a brief overview of these topics that could usually take 2 hours. So flag me questions as I go, and then please get in touch if you have questions. Okay. Next slide. Jade. Thank you. Okay. So the board governs all of the meetings that all of you attend as city council members and planning commission and planning commissioners. The Bronx has been the secretary of council in that. And the basic tenet is that public commissions, boards, and councils and other public agencies in this state exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. It is the intent of the law that their actions be taken openly and their deliberations be conducted openly. So, Law Act is essentially a series of rules for effectuate this intent. All meetings of the legislative body must be open and public. As a general legislative body are any body that is appointed by another legislative body. So this council is created by the state, so you are necessarily a legislative body. The planning commission is created by the city council, so the planning commission is necessarily a legislative body. If the city council forms a committee, most of the time it is also a legislative body. If that committee is formed by regardless of its jurisdiction, if a committee has continuing subject matter jurisdiction, or regardless of its position, if it has continuing subject matter jurisdiction and a meeting schedule set by law. So if the city council says, we are forming a committee of 2 city council members to interview potential planning commission, that is not a legislative body. If the city council says, we are creating a just the one in culture commission, and they charge the commission will be to X, Y, and Z. It will meet every Wednesday. That is a standing body, right? The city council is a legislative body, is another legislative body with continuing discussion. The only ones that are appointed by legislative bodies that are not subject to the Brown Act are those that are quick. They're called ad hoc, but they're quick. They're only 2 council members and else, and they task and they just I always get nervous. I come into the new city and we've had that ad hoc committee for 2 years now. We're going to renew it. It's probably not. Okay. Meeting of a legislative body is a congregation of a quorum, it's a majority. Same time and location, discuss, deliberate, and take action on any item in this agency subject matter jurisdiction. 3, quorum of the commission, quorum of the council can go out to dinner. Talk about the new season of White Lotus. Talk about, excited for spring, garden, fine. You cannot talk about what's that thing, the rail train. You can't talk about that. You cannot talk about that. It's a Brown Act meeting. It's a form, and it should have been compliant with correct regulation. These are designed for the people to come. Meetings have to be noticed. 22-hour meetings for regular meetings, or meetings that are laid out in your meeting code. 24 hours for special meetings. Emergency meetings can have as much as 1 hour notice. Emergency meetings are extremely rare. I don't even know that we've had one in Capitola, despite the fact that we've had plenty of emergencies. We had one of my cities where we had to evacuate the city because fires were approaching. But that's it. 20 years ago. Yes. Yeah, good question. A special meeting can be for any topic. It is just a meeting that is held generally. Special meetings are like this to discuss one topic. Generally, no reason, just sort of a practical reason. Generally designed to allow the commission to discuss a big issue, or sometimes we decide if something is a timeliness issue. Sometimes they'll look at the council or the commission just has massive agendas lately and we want to relieve some of the pressure. Sometimes it's just sort of an agenda management issue. There is no topic that there are a couple topics that cannot be discussed at a special meeting, but in general, we can discuss the same thing at a special that we can discuss at a regular. Special requires 24 hours notice, regular requires 72, and regular with the schedule is 7. sorry, my vision's going worse for the day. Okay, on the agenda, circulated in advance of the meeting. When the agenda goes out, you'll see it on the website. Along with that, you'll see the packet, which includes the staff report, the supporting information. All that's required on the agenda, which is like this, the actual agenda, is a brief description of the item that will be discussed. It has to be enough. The description of the actual agenda of this has to be enough to communicate to the public enough information. The public wants to share their view on a particular topic. They knew at that moment, right? If an item is not on the agenda, in general, you can't at the meeting. There are very few things you can talk about before you know it on the agenda. You can ask a question of staff, ask for something to put on a future agenda, brought back to you. Something comes up in public comment, questions about an intersection. So an intersection, a council member or commissioner could say to staff, please bring back a report on that intersection. I would like to see a report on expanding the formula retail ordinance, whatever. But you can't say, I'm concerned about that intersection as well. And then have a conversation on the difference with felon questions. I will tell you my sort of guidelines, which is awful to enforce, because I'm often the one who has to enforce the council off of the agenda. So you comes to me, you're going to do this. Or I turn to them, you're going to do this. Usually someone says something that's off the agenda, get just a little bit of lead. And when the second person chimes in and it's really starting to be a discussion, I'll usually pick up and say, we're straying on the agenda. And I'll look to the mayor to bring back to the agenda. It seems like it's a sound issue. We pass the freedom. Okay, no problem. Sorry. I don't want to. I just got so much around that so fast.
Oh, the online one. Yeah, I was gonna say make your tea. Yeah.
It's a switch. Okay.
It's nice you bring out the glass pictures. It's a nice meeting. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, you're used to it then. they're very nice. I'm impressed. Thanks.
Well, it wasn't everybody's mic, was it? It sounds like mine's off right now.
Oh, these are off.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to use my outside voice. Does that work? Okay. Can you hear me? You know? Okay. Okay. I'm nervous tonight. All right. Okay. Meeting. This comes up. This has come up recently when we got Zoom bombed. Did Capitola get Zoom bombed? So many get Zoom bombed. They all run together. Oh gosh. Okay. So since then, before then, honestly, we had very little discussions about when we would shut down public comment. Was sort of the general approach, but we started thinking about it around COVID. Our cities were getting Zoom bombed and some in person. Zoom bombing. But, so the rule is members of the public are allowed to speak during general comments on non-agendized items. They're allowed to speak in any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. That is quite broad. It is not necessarily items that are before you, or that might even be before you that year. There are things that could be before you, right? It's quite broad that a member of the public can speak on. So in general, again, I think aside from COVID, there are very few times I have said off the agenda, I suggest shut this down. And so if that happens, often I will have talked to the mayor in advance if we're expecting it. If you're stopping public comment, it, it's a high it's a higher risk situation. It's very, very rare. Even more rare is to have someone removed from the meeting. That has happened in Capitola as well once. And so the thing about it is that someone is actually being disruptive. It does not matter what they are saying. The comparison that we always use is the case out of Santa Cruz a few years ago of someone doing a Nazi salute in a council meeting that was litigated. There were all sorts of issues there. But ultimately, the court found that the council had erred in having that person removed from the meeting. A court found in another case that a council had not erred by having some protesters at a school board meeting who were putting trash on the area before the council. That was disruptive, the court found. And so if you look at that, regardless of political proclivities, it would seem to me that the most offensive of those two might be the Nazi salute. But the court really doesn't care, right? The court doesn't care about the content of what someone is doing. Someone chanting, "We love Capitola, we love Capitola." If they're doing it at the back of the room loud enough that the council or the commission can't go about your business, it's disruptive. And they can be, what we would say is you warn them, then you stop the meeting, then you clear the chambers. If someone is being disruptive and threatening, the police can remove them. A question came up, we got an email, saying that the city had violated someone's rights by prohibiting clapping during a meeting. This comes up in almost every council meeting that I'm at where there's a controversial item on the agenda. And almost every time the mayor will say, our mayor said, would you please not clap? It's disrespectful. I don't remember how our mayor said it, but what I usually say is it's disrespectful to your fellow community members and might make them nervous about speaking. Something like that. Does anyone think I'm going to put the mayor on the spot, but does anyone think that's a violation of the law? Yeah, you can answer. I may have told you. Yeah, it's not. It's not. It's one thing. We're not prohibiting clapping, right? We're not having somebody removed from the meeting for clapping. We're saying, please be respectful of your fellow community members. If we have 45 people in the audience and 40 are supportive of one thing and 5 are not, we don't chill those 5 people's opportunity to speak by intimidating them. So we kind of conduct ourselves in a certain way. That's fine. Same thing with asking people to say their name when they come up to the dais. You cannot legally require any sort of barrier to entry to participate in a meeting. We can't legally require them to state their name, which is why we say, state your name when you will not be allowed to speak. Say, please tell us. Yeah. Yeah. It is a reason disruption is the standard is because of freedom of speech. Because we're not discriminating based on the content of the speech. We cannot do that because of freedom of speech. Because of freedom of speech, we can only remove someone if they're being actually disruptive. Okay. Improper meetings, I'm going to start moving on. Oh, yeah.
I guess I'm just wondering, like, how that comes into play with things like the Zoom bombing. Like, if people are just being like terrible, nasty in person, do they have every right to say racial slurs and things like that? I guess.
Yeah, it was really tricky, and I'm sort of going to dodge that question in case it comes up again, because Berkeley had the best response, which was, "We're just going to shut this down, and you can sue us." That's one sort of like go get them response. It's so often it happens, right? It really depends on what's being said, and but in general, if someone is making a comment on an item within the subject matter of the jurisdiction, that is a public comment that's permissible, even if it's laced with racist. The thing with the Zoom bombs actually is they were not even related to the agenda. Yeah, like they would start. They would say, like, I'd like you to consider amending the general plan. And you'd be like, okay, we're doing okay. And then they just get off to the races with kind of wackadoo comments that had truly nothing to do with the agenda. So that was a little bit easier call. And I think there are some that could frankly be a harder call. Do you remember that you were mayor? That was rough. Okay. Some Brown Act meetings that you should not do. Daisy chain. Joe can't talk to, Mayor Clark can't talk to Vice Mayor Peterson, and then Vice Mayor Peterson can't go to Councilmember Morgan and say, Mayor Clark told me and I think this. That's three people. Even though they're not meeting at one time, that's three people talking to each other. Similarly, if a developer in town goes to Commissioner Westman, Chair Westman, and are you the chair? Did I just hurt you? Okay. 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 If a developer goes to Commissioner Westman and says, I'd like you to vote on this project as blah, 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 and you say, sounds good to me, I'd like to add 12 units. And then the developer goes to Commissioner Pugh, say that correctly, and says, well, Commissioner Westman told me that she'd like me to add 12 units. I think I could add 6. Does that work for you? And he says, yes, 6 would be okay with me. And then he goes to Commissioner Howard and says, well, I've gotten this from Commissioner Pugh, this from Commissioner Westman. What do you think? That is a hub and spoke. The developer is not violating the Brown Act because the developer is not subject to the Brown Act, but the three of you are. And so what you have to do in that situation is you have to tell the developer, listen, I can talk to you, or not. You don't want to, but whatever. But I can talk to you, but you cannot share with me what my fellow commissioners are saying. I cannot share with them what I am saying, because I am bound to that. All right. There are exceptions to the Brown Act conferences and community meetings. I don't really know why these are called exceptions, because really, I mean, you can gather, I guess, you can gather at a conference. A quorum can gather at a conference, and it doesn't have to be a notice meeting. But you still, at that conference, cannot get together and talk about city business, right? So you got dinner. This is really like for Cal City, big conferences that talk about issues that affect municipalities. So, yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me talk about that, okay? So, I suspect that what Councilmember Morgan is referring to is the town hall that the LTC just publicized for March 1st. 4th. Sorry. I'm talking about this, which is kind of right. It's not even words, it's just like sound. Okay. And so I think the question is, council members or planning commissioners, can a quorum if you attend? And the answer is I don't know, because I don't know, probably like you and perhaps like members of our community, I don't know what will be discussed at the town hall. So I don't know enough to advise you about whether you can attend. I am working to get more information so that I can advise you, and hopefully it'll be by tomorrow and we can make an announcement at the council meeting. But I am talking to RTC's attorney. Jamie is talking to the director. So we're getting more information for you. The question is really whether it's a Brown Act meeting, meaning whether it is a meeting to discuss an issue involving specifically Capitola, such that a quorum of the council and the commission cannot attend at all without it being a notice meeting, or is it a broader meeting discussing the overall trail and issues involving Capitola will be discussed? I don't know. I'm talking about to RTC. Thanks for the question. We're on it. We'll get back to it. Okay. Community meeting exception is really designed for like real community, right? Like this comes up a lot in cities that have districts. You know, where they'll have a district 6. They'll have a district 6 meeting and multiple council members can go to that and it's not a Brown Act meeting. Or if there's just a community meeting regarding water rates, right? You can go to that. A quorum can go to that, but you can't discuss your opinion. Okay. Okay. Limited social media exception. Social media. Julie will be talking about that more later. Julie, are you the one covering social media? Chloe will be talking about social media later. What you need to do for purposes of the Brown Act is that you can post on social media with updates about the city, but you cannot respond to any post from a fellow commissioner or member. You cannot like it. You cannot do an emoji smiley face. You cannot say, this is nonsense. Okay? It's kind of a harsh rule, but maybe the people who write the Brown Act aren't that familiar with the difference between a like and a smiley face. Okay, closed session. If you think of the Brown Act as a glass house, so the public can see in, we are the government in that glass house doing our business. The public can always see what we're doing. There are some times when we need to close the curtains so the public can't see. Those times are very, very rare because most of what we do should be out for the public to see. So when we go into closed session, it's because I have discussed with Jamie the topic that we will be discussing in closed session and whether it will be closed session and whether one of the exemptions of the Brown Act applies. The most common closed sessions are litigation, real estate negotiation, personnel, and labor. Discussion information in closed session is confidential. You can only have people in closed session who have information to add. So usually it's Jamie and me and maybe a staff member. If it's labor negotiation, we'll have our negotiator in there. But it's not like it is no one in there in the council. It is no one in there who does not have a purpose to be in there. There's no note. Okay, Brown Act. Go through that. Any questions? Easy enough. The PRA. Man alive. Cities have just been besieged with PRAs. I mean, just besieged. Julia, do you have any thoughts on the increase in PRAs in the last?
I have worked in government for nearing 8 years now. It's just scary to admit out loud. But in the 8 years, it's augmented every year. In Capitola, in a little over 2 years I've been here, we've seen a really big increase. This month alone, we've had about one per day, at least, which for Capitola is really unusual.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, next. So I'm going to go over what the PRA is, what you should be doing to help keep Capitola's streak of not getting a PRA writ alive. Okay, public record is any record containing information relating to the conduct of the people's business, prepared, owned, used, or retained by any state or local agency, regardless of physical form or characteristic. What that means is it does not matter if it is a text. It does not matter if it is on your personal cell. It does not matter if it's on your Gmail or Hotmail. If you, like my husband, still have a Hotmail account. Doesn't matter if it's on Hotmail. Doesn't matter if it's a messenger on the Facebook. Instagram, whatever. Doesn't matter. If it's written and it relates to the public's business, it is, and you are a commissioner or a council member, it is a public record. So if we get a records request for all communications regarding X, today we got one regarding X, I don't remember, that we will ask you for all of those communications. And so the bottom line is, to make your lives easier, you should limit your communications to media that are easy to pull from if we get a records request, right? So I always say to council members, the best thing for you to do is limit your communications over email to your city-issued email account. Because when we get a records request, we just have IT go in and search your city account. We get a records request, Julia or my office comes up with search terms for the records request. We go in, pull all those emails, pull any other documents from staff, and then sometimes Julia will review them. Sometimes my office will review and do like a pull for privilege or any non-responsive or any documents that we don't turn over for some reason or another. And then we will also, though, ask you for any email, for you to go through your personal email accounts, your phones, your social media. So just think of how difficult that is if you're like all over the place with your communications. It's easier if you have one email account. Do commissioners have a Capitola email account? So commissioners,
We do not.
you do not.
We can't. You're eligible to receive it.
I would suggest that commissioners get an email account because then you just do your city business on that email account. If you don't want to for some reason, you can set up a separate Gmail account or whatever you use. Finding Commissioner Christensen at Gmail, whatever. It just is easier when you need to pull records rather than going through like the Gmail search function. Same with text. It's a pain to search text. And then you got to screenshot everything and send it to me. So, yeah, make your lives a little easier. Okay, skip this. This one just says that even if a record is in a personal cell, it's disclosable. Not every document is a public record, meaning if you are texting another council member about lunch, that is probably not a public record. But if it involves city business, almost every record is going to be public. The test is whether it relates in a substantive way to the conduct of the people's business or it's primarily personal. Court looks at a bunch of different factors: content, context, purpose, audience. Was the individual acting within the scope of their employment or office? It's pretty broad, and so when we ask you to pull records and send them to us, we want you to be broad, and then we will go through them and pull out what we think is not responsive. Next. Oh, hi, Alex.
I just wanted to confirm that relevant text through whatever mode includes messages sent to us that we don't respond to.
Yes, that's a good question. So yes, it includes well, it depends on what the request says, right? So let's use a broad request. Let's use, give me all communications regarding the, whatever, I'll just say that an item that's on my mind, the Bay and Hill Street intersection project for the last 12 months, right? So the way we would do that is we would work with Julia to come up with some search terms. Julia would work with IT to pull all of the relevant records from city emails. So we would probably look at, goodness gracious, council members' emails, staff members' emails, and then we would pull all the records from planning, all the old staff reports. Then we would ask the council, please do a search on your email accounts for these search terms, emails, social media, texts, send us what you've got. And so, yes, it would capture anything that you've got in your inbox that was sent to you, even if you don't respond. Things that we will not turn over, these are not determinations that you should make. These are determinations that really our office should make. But there's some exceptions to the Public Records Act. Preliminary drafts. So if staff is going back and forth on a draft of like a staff report, or if we're doing, like, for instance, a rate study, and or a CEQA analysis, and staff is making comments on the report saying, what about this? Did you consider this argument? Did you look at this evidence? Did you look at this bit of history? That's not public, right? Because we don't want to chill staff's ability and council's ability to develop a robust product. Documents relating to pending litigation, personnel documents, anything attorney-client or otherwise privileged will not be turned over. And there's a catch-all test. If withholding benefits the public more than disclosure, it will not be disclosed. Okay. Anything else on the PRA? One thing I'll add on the PRA is the remedy for the PRA is harsh. It's if a member of the public feels as though they aren't getting the documents they should have gotten, they can file a writ against the city, which is just like a truncated lawsuit.
and the city, their argument would be that we didn't turn over X, Y, and Z. Sometimes we can win those if it's like you didn't turn over the minutes from this meeting, and we're saying, yes, we did. Here are the minutes. We turned them over on this date. They're bait stamped. It's a little harder for the city if it's a broader request. So when we ask you for documents, we ask that you take it really seriously and that you respond and say that you don't have anything. Depending on the request, sometimes we'll even ask you to sign a declaration, say that you've done a diligent search. Okay, conflicts. How am I doing? Okay. We start at 5:30? Okay. Conflicts of interest. My entire purpose for conflicts of interest is to just tell you that conflicts are very complicated. And so to discourage you from texting me in the middle of the meeting saying, you know, I work for this agency. Should I not be voting on this? Or I live next door to this development. None of you do that, but some councils do. Don't do that. If you suspect you have a conflict, tell me very early, because several of you have gotten recent conflict analyses from my office, and I expect that you will note that they are lengthy and they are detailed and they're very boring. They are so boring that I just write the answer for you at the top. I say, you likely do or you likely do not have a conflict. See below. You can read or not the below, but it's very complicated, the analysis. There's all these opinion letters that we have to go and look to. Often there's not a situation. The FPPC, which is the body that rules on conflicts, has not often ruled on your particular item, and so we have to go find letters that consider issues similar to your issues and an issue and analogize. And sometimes the answer isn't clear, so we have to weigh your risk. The bottom line is we need to know early so we can do the best analysis possible for you. And also, my office does not give determinations. All we give is advice. And so we usually give somewhat conservative advice. If you want a determination, you need to go to the FPPC. There are some times when it's a great idea to go to the FPPC. I have another council member in another jurisdiction who is a mortgage broker. And so we went to the FPPC and said, here are various scenarios in which he could have a potential conflict with potential development should he recuse. They wouldn't give us a ruling. We went on another project. We had a massive project that we were working on in another jurisdiction, and a council member lived within 500 feet of one parcel in the project. There were like 9. And we said, is he recused from just that parcel, or is he recused from the entire project? The FPPC, just rolling the dice, sometimes said the entire project. But it's good to know if you have a conflict that might arise at multiple different decisions before the council. And if we have time, then we'll ask the FPPC for an analysis. Otherwise, we do our best and we kind of work with you on it. General rules, you cannot make, the FPPC does not want you making any decision from which you could gain anything financially. That's the primary rule. You or close family member could have any financial gain. Economic interests are broadly defined. It could be any source of income of at least $500, any business entity, any real property in which you own over $2,000 that's within 500 to 1,000 feet of the project, or up to 1,000 feet. Any indirect investments. And then there are special rules for, sorry, Julie, I'm not putting this together in my brain. There are special rules for leasehold. So if you lease instead of own, you too can have a conflict. So just please talk to us early if you believe that you could have a conflict. There are some exceptions to the conflicts rules, which the public generally exception, I know, but I think it's a problem. Okay.
This one's working good. It's just keep it right where it is.
You're doing great.
Yeah,
good. Okay. So the public generally exception, essentially, if you have a conflict, but the conflict the financial interest that you have is the same as lots of other people. The classic example is zoning, right? If we're going to look at changes to the zoning code for a certain zoning designation in town, and you live in that zone or within 500 feet, you can still vote on that item because you are affected in the same way that others are affected. Same with taxes, like putting a tax measure on the ballot or a rate. If you will be affected by an increased utility rate, as will everyone else. There's a specific analysis if it's something that is not quite as legislative. There's a specific analysis that we go into that has to, it's 25%. If 25% of all businesses, real property, or individuals are affected in the same way as you are, then you are accepted from the PRA under the public generally exception. Again, this is a complicated analysis that takes a long time to do, so please do not vote on an item and then tell me later that you were okay because you had a conflict, but you decided that you were accepted because of public generally.
One thing I'll add on this is this in particular, these are really hard for there's kind of multiple layers because you have to do some GIS analysis on them at the staff level. So our staff is doing GIS analysis. We're sending the numbers, trying to send it to the city attorneys. The city attorneys are saying, well, could we maybe look at it a different way? So there's just a lot of back and forth. So definitely with this, if you're looking for public generally, those of you who have seen the analysis, it does require a lot of mapping and GIS work as well as the legal work.
Yeah, and I will tell you that this often comes up on large projects where a member might be conflicted from a smaller portion of the project, but not the broader project, because even if the member is conflicted from the smaller portion, the public generally exception might not apply to that smaller portion because we're only looking at a subset of the population. But if we're looking at the larger project, then we might be looking at a larger portion of the population, so the public generally exception might apply. Legally required participation. I have actually never had to do this, but have you had to do it?
We've had to do it.
We have to do it?
We drew straws.
We drew straws? With me?
Well, not at the council and planning commission.
Okay.
Yeah, our commissioner.
You won. That's great. Okay, so legally required is exactly like it sounds. If the council needs to make a decision on something, or the commission needs to make a decision on something, and you have too many commissioners or council members who are conflicted out, you draw straws to see who gets to participate, who wins and gets to participate.
And weirdly, you don't rank the level of conflict.
No. I know it's super weird.
Clearly, this one person is
there's no
married to the
substantive
person.
analysis.
Yeah,
No.
which is really interesting because you'd think that you'd be like, well, this person is you're getting $1 million from this, and the other person has a very peripheral. No,
It's very hard for lawyers. Like my colleagues who have had to do this, it's very antithetical for lawyers, the suggestion, because it just feels like, what do you mean? Like it doesn't matter? Like it's just, I don't know, draw a straw. Like it feels very discombobulated. What? Just to reach a quorum, yeah. And it can't be because someone didn't come to the meeting. You just have to reschedule the meeting. It has to be because people have genuine conflicts. So it can be a drag. Like if it comes up the most with development projects, right? Because you have to make a decision on the project. So it can be quite a feat.
It's an obvious conflict. I have a project.
Yeah.
And it's going to come to the planning commission. Obviously, I'm conflicted. Do I still need to go to your? I'm conflicted.
So if you had a project that was coming to the
Planning commission.
you should organize that with the chair. Sometimes what we'll do is we will if we know about the conflict before the agenda goes out, we'll place the item sometimes on the agenda so that it's convenient for the recusing member to either come late or to leave early. Or sometimes if it's after the agenda comes out, we'll say to the mayor or the chair, hey, can you maybe reorganize the agenda so and so can leave? But it depends on if there's other items on the agenda.
But every conflict, the city wants to know about.
Oh, yes. And then you do need to come to the meeting because you need to say for the record that you have a conflict. The FEPC requires you to say, I'll write you a little script. Like, I have a financial interest in it, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah. You need to get up and leave. You have to go, sit outside. And let me put a caveat on that. You are recused from the entire process, right? So you should not be talking to staff in advance about it. You should not be talking to other council members. You cannot, the regulation says that you cannot influence or participate in the decision. You can't influence. What you can do is if it is a decision that affects your personal property, you can sit in the audience and even speak on the matter as it relates to your personal property, which is more narrow than what a regular member of the audience can say, right? A regular member of the audience can come up and say, I think the work at this intersection is indicative of the city's approach to traffic in general, and I think we need to reconsider that. You can't say that. You can say, I think the work at the intersection is going to make my property value decrease, and that's a bummer. Or it's going to be really loud for me. So it's narrow. Did I answer your question? Okay. I'm almost finished. I know. Contractual conflicts of interest. Section 1090 is a different type of conflict. This rarely happens. It essentially says that the city cannot enter into a contract with itself. So the reason I pause on your question, Commissioner Howard, is if you, for instance, were a contractor, not a good example. The city could not enter into a contract with your contracting business, right? If you had a contracting business, we could not hire you to do the community center, right? Because you are the city and we cannot contract with ourselves. If we do that, it's harsh. Any public official who knowingly participates with the 1090 conflict, there's a fine, a misdemeanor, and you are banned from public office forever. It's a harsh remedy.
Potentially felony.
Okay, thank you.
Look at the screen.
Okay. Okay, and for the city, the impact on the city is the contract is void, right? So think of it, it's the same with Brown Act issues, regular FPPC issues. There's always the specter of us having to do the item again. And so think of what a slog some of these items are lately in every city, right? Like it's a lot going on in cities. So think of what a slog it is if we had to do that item again. So please tell us your conflict. Yes. Okay, just did that. Rosenberg's rules. Jamie, home stretch.
Am I doing it?
You want it? I was planning to, but
no, you got this.
Okay, Rosenberg's
But
rules.
I gotta get to chime in twice. I get 2 chimes.
I'll give you 3. Okay, Rosenberg's rules. So long ago, every city, every jurisdiction used Robert's rules. These were the dark days. Since that time, Judge Rosenberg wrote some rules. They're like 10 pages long and kind of chatty. If you haven't read them, you really should. They're very readable. And he says, look, listen, these rules should be, Robert's rules are great for like parliament. This is not that. Most of us are working with 5-member bodies, and the rules need to be clear and understandable and easy to apply. So use these rules. And a bunch of cities have adopted them. They're great. So Rosenberg's rules have 3 basic motions. The regular motion, and I came up with this example. I tried to come up with something super benign. I moved that council host a carnival in April. That's just the basic motion, right? Or that the city hosts a carnival in April. Then there could be the motion to amend. I move to amend that motion and say that we host a carnival in July, right? Just a slight change. And then someone could say, so if those 2 motions are on the floor, you take the second one first, right? The mayor could say, okay, call for a vote on the second motion that we host the carnival in July. Get a vote on that. And then, yeah, they could make the first motion. I should have had Jamie do this. They could make the first motion second and then make the second motion second. What I bet you're thinking of is what happens most often, which is friendly amendments. I'm going to go over these rules just because they're in Rosenberg's rules and there are options, but really what we see the most, thankfully, is friendly amendments. So a motion to amend is just taking the regular motion that's on the floor and slightly tweaking it. A substitute motion is saying, I make a substitute motion, and the intent is to sweep away the first motion and put the new motion in its place. In any case, the mayor or the chair takes the motions in reverse order. The theory is that the third, if there could be 3 motions, could knock out the second and the first, and you save time, and everybody wins. Most commonly, we see friendly amendments. So someone says, I move that we have a carnival in April. Second chair or commissioner said, somebody says second. then the third commissioner says, I have a friendly amendment. Would you accept that we have a carnival in April on the wharf? And the person who made the motion says, I'll accept that amendment. And the person who seconded says, I'll accept that amendment. And then that's your new motion. That's what we see the most often. I appreciate it because it kind of shows the body is functioning well. Okay. There are a whole bunch. Oh, this is the general order of items. Item called, usually, do you call it or does the mayor? Mayor, okay. Mayor calls the item. It varies by city. Mayor calls the item. Mayor will usually say, we'll have a staff report, and we'll present the staff report. Then the mayor will call, or the chair will call for clarifying questions from the council or the commissioners, and then public comment, and then this is what Rosenberg says. This is not necessarily what we do. The chair or mayor then invites the motion, and then there's a motion and a second, and then the motion is clarified, and then there's discussion. While the motion is on the floor, I know it's a little weird. While the motion is on the floor, and then there's a vote, and then the chair announces the result of the vote. The way we usually do it is the chair says, staff report, then there's clarifying questions, public comment, then discussion, then the motion. Either is fine. I think that that's why because Rosenberg's is set up this way, I think that's why they contemplate all of these different motions, because it sort of contemplates that you work out the ultimate action by motion. The way that I see Capitola do it is work it out by talking amongst yourselves like grown-ups, and then you arrive at what the motion will be. And most of my cities do it the way Capitola does it, and usually by the time you get there, there's some understanding of what the motion will be, and people know if they're going to vote for it or against it. There's some modifying, but it's not that's not the majority of the discussion. And then a few other motions that are contemplated by Rosenberg's that I really just never see. Motion to adjourn. Maybe we should see that more often. Motion to adjourn. That's like, let's beat it. We've had enough. I love that it only requires a simple majority and no debate. Motion to recess, same. Motion to fix time to adjourn. Motion to table. Let's just stop talking about this for now. Motion to limit debate or call the question. This one, because it shuts down participation, requires a supermajority. And so this would be, you're up there, you've been talking, someone says, I call the question. In theory, Rosenberg contemplates that you stop and the mayor, if it gets seconded, the mayor calls for a vote on calling the question. It needs a supermajority, so 4 people. And then if it passes, then you take a vote on the item. Debate is stopped.
This is my number 2, right?
Yeah.
Number 2. So, in my experience, this is of these, this is the only one that comes up now and then. And usually, the way I've never actually seen a vote when someone.
Yeah.
So really, what usually ends up happening is somebody is just talking along, right? And another council member is like, "We know what we're doing. We have a motion on the floor. Like, come on, we need to move along." And they say, "Call the question." And what I've usually seen the mayor do is sort of suss it out and say, why don't we give this person another minute to wrap up, or say, you're right, we need to vote.
Yes.
That's typically the way, and it's not common. It's kind of aggressive, but also it's one of those things that, like, it depends on your council and it depends on the relationships among the people in the council. But I've never actually seen an actual vote on the call question. It's more like someone just saying,
yeah. Okay, I'm going to end with everybody's favorite motion, the motion for reconsideration. I get asked about this motion more than any other motion. It is not as useful as I think people think, because it has to be made in the same, it is truly, oh no, I misunderstood, or I screwed up. It has to be made in the same meeting by someone in the majority on the original vote. So it cannot be made 3 meetings later to go back and reconsider a vote. At that point, Rosenberg talked about this being an effort to have finality in council agendas and council business, which is great, but the reality is that the council and the commission can consider anything that you would like, including items that you have previously considered, although not via a motion for reconsideration. Okay, I'm done. Any questions? Okay. I have 2 minutes if you want to break before.
All right. This is nice. So first, I have to apologize. I'm just doing presentations all the time on the same topics. This is my first time doing it, so I expect her to be jumping in here and correcting me along. That's it. First slide. So first off, we're going to talk about a number of things. We're going to talk about city administrative policies. We're going to talk about the muni code, just some different things that relate to kind of your role as city council or members of the board. These are city policies that really kind of direct us in some sense to govern the city council adopted about rules itself, boards and commissions. Next slide. The top three we're going to talk about. The bottom three, interestingly enough, we've already valued this because we go through and all policies and we discover that really those bottom three mean they're all out of cell phone use 2011, law policy, I think 2006. Apparently 2006, I think it's not happening. The social media about it. Yeah, but there's a lot of consumer that I think to the blogs. So, anyway, yeah. Well, so we're going to talk about the first three this evening, and the other three, city council will get a chance to take a look at the feeling, and I'm trying to bring that up today here in the next hopefully.
Just on the QR code, that QR code takes anybody that wants to look at it to the repository of all of our administrative policies, and they're available to the public. And so, if you want to take a look at all of our various administrative policies, they're available.
Okay. So, I'm not sure if this order of all of our policies makes the most sense, but we're starting where we started. So we're going to talk about abstentions. We have a policy about abstentions, and you were wondering why in the world the city council has a policy about abstentions, and it really came down to an individual council member a number of years ago who would sit up there and talk with the council, listen to public comment, listen to staff presentation, debate the item, and it came time for the roll call vote. It's 1 in favor, 2 against, and the final vote, they say, abstain. Crush it. The city council vote wasn't very happy with the body, and they said that shouldn't be there. And so we adopted a policy that is basically unenforceable, but it's a statement that says the expectation is if you participate in the decision-making process, if you sit up here, your job is to decide. Your job is to lack a different at the time, the council said, well, we need an ordinance on this, we needed to be a policy. Let's make it a policy, and let's see if it becomes a problem. It hasn't been a problem since 2003. So, just wanted you to be aware of it, that the city in general has a policy. That's not to say they need to have stuff like doesn't apply. If you have a conflict of interest and you can refuse, you have to refuse a step away from it. Next slide. This one is going to be Chloe's.
How exciting. Thank you, Mayor and Chair. It's nice to see you all. I haven't met all of our Planning Commission, so welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be quick. This policy I actually wrote with much help from our city attorney back in 2019. So it's still fairly accurate, which is impressive because things do change quickly with social media. Thank you. The bottom line is, like our city attorney said, social media is tricky. We're not telling you not to use it. We are offering you guidelines on how to interact with the public in a way that kind of protects the city and yourselves, and the idea that you are neutral parties making decisions in an open to the public meeting rather than on Instagram. So something to keep in mind. There are two different types of decisions that yourselves often will make. Planning Commission much more frequently will make quasi-judicial decisions. Those are votes that decide something that affects like one person, one project, one family, one house, right? Legislative decisions are public policy, larger decisions that affect groups of people, the whole city, similar to what our attorney was talking about earlier. So you can ask yourself, because sometimes I get confused too, does this decision affect one person or many people? because based on your decision, sharing about it on social media is going to change, right? And that's so tiny I can barely see it. So acceptable use of social media, sharing city-created content, we're always going to be okay with, and in fact, we encourage it. Thank you for doing that. Thank you, City Clerk. So that you don't really need to worry about. That an example of that is if there's a city event happening, any kind of warnings, reminders, get your business licenses, anything kind of like that, we would love for you to share, and that's fine. Something that is potentially acceptable is going to be sharing or posting content that is about some kind of quasi-judicial city matter. So if it's about a specific permit, something about maybe an appeal, that's going to become a little more dicey, to say the least. So what we're trying to avoid is the creation of what we're calling ex parte communications, which is basically like the public comments that happen during a public meeting, but online where they're not becoming part of the record. So what we are discouraging you from doing is treating, I hope I'm right. I mean,
I'm laughing at
okay,
them.
they're laughing at me. So anyway,
No, we're not laughing
moving
at
forward,
Always laughing at Jane.
you don't want to treat specific decisions about like one family differently. If you never post anything online ever, and then you post about a proposed affordable housing project in the middle of town, that's going to raise some eyebrows, right? That's something we might ask you not to do. And like I said, comments around those posts are going to become part of the public record because it's basically a form of public communication and public comment. So what we don't want you to do at all, and what is against the policy, is expressing your personal opinions before an open meeting, right, on social media. So the idea is you're gathering information from the public as a representative government, and then you're discussing it in an open meeting after hearing from staff and the public, and then you're making a decision. So if you're posting online before the meeting, I'm against this project, come and tell us how you feel during the meeting, it's defeating the purpose of serving on council, I think is fair to say, yes.
But I think the key difference here, and Sam, chime in if you think I'm wrong, is if you do that about a permit you're going to be issuing on the planning commission, you're going to need to recuse. Maybe. You're going to need to recuse, maybe. Because you've already stated what your choice is. If you're stating that, you say, come to the budget hearing and advocate for funding for basketball courts in town, you probably don't need to recuse because that's a legislative decision, and the standard for you can express opinions about legislative decisions. So when you're in a quasi-judicial role, you're kind of acting as a judge. You're judging the city's laws, how they apply in this specific case. And if you say, hey, join me in bringing this project down, you're not coming into the hearing unbiased, right?
Right. When someone comes to the commission for a permit, either in the first instance or they're appealing a decision from staff, or they come to the council, usually on an appeal of a decision from the commission, you are sitting in your quasi-adjudicatory capacity. So you are sitting as a judge. As a judge, the person who is coming before you has a due process right. And so if you are biased, you are violating their due process right. That's why we are more concerned about you expressing and you making up your mind prior to the hearing with quasi-adjudicatory matters than with legislative matters where there is no one's due process is at stake. Did you have a question, Commissioner Westman? That's right. It may not be a great idea to express an opinion about, for instance, a new zoning ordinance before you discuss it on the dais, but it's likely not unlawful. If you express an opinion about a quasi-adjudicatory matter, it is possible that you are expressing bias in violation of the due process rights of someone who is bringing that item to the body.
That was very helpful. Thank you both. So here's a fun example. This is the kind of post we want you to share. And that's a real post from a couple years ago. So this is pretty clear. This is a rec event, family movie night. Come and enjoy what the city has to offer. Great, love it. Again, this is a non-city content, but relative to those that live in the city, active weather pattern, hey, stay aware, sandbags available at City Hall. Awesome, great, you're looking out for your community. Thank you. This is more questionable. We have a council person as a council member posting online, as you've often probably seen lately. I don't normally post, but what do you think about this person's backyard? Leave your comments here. No, thank you. For reasons I think are clear already. Discouraged. And then I think the next example is like a definite no. Again, even more aggressive. I sort of already mentioned it. The mayor starts posting specific projects that they oppose. Come to the meeting and tell us why you oppose it. I've already decided. Just please don't. It will make everyone's lives easier if you don't do that. Okay. And I think, yay, I'll stop talking. Thank you for listening.
I get to jump in. So I'm going to talk about briefly the adopted code of conduct, which is adopted by an administrative policy approved by the city council. I don't know if this might be, no. Okay. Okay.
Julia.
So the policy was developed in 2020 and adopted in 2021. It's relatively recent. It works in conjunction with all the legal requirements that Sam has already covered. The policy created core values for city council members and appointed officials, so planning commissioners, but also all members of the city's appointed advisory bodies. And then the policy also created procedures to investigate violations of the standard. So if a elected or appointed official was in violation of something in the policy, it created a standard process for how to treat those violations, and then how to respond to violations from staff or from the council. The policy was really created with the purpose of having more transparency and decision-making standards that apply to everybody uniformly, and then it also established standards for relations between council members to perform at public meetings, ensure that we are treating each other appropriately, ethically, and productively at the dais, and then establishing standards for communications with the public, for boards and commissions, agencies, staff, and media, and then it creates guidelines how city council appointed officials and city staff can interact in a positive way together. So again, the policy was adopted back in 2021, and it's reviewed pretty regularly for consistency and best practices.
I will add that it was developed, another jurisdiction in this county was going through a really difficult time at that point, and they were sort of dealing with complaints about between council members, between staff and council members, and it was elevating to a pretty high level, and they didn't have anything like this. And so that was kind of the genesis, I think, for the council members on Capitola who suggested it was seeing the challenges of another local jurisdiction when they didn't have a bit of a roadmap to follow. It's a loose roadmap to follow, but at least it's something. So that was kind of how that came about.
And I'll turn it back to Jamie.
All right. So a question you might have is, how does something get on a city council agenda? And there's a couple different ways. One is that, first off, cities don't all do this the same way. You may have seen in the city of Santa Cruz, when a council member wants to put something on agenda, I believe it requires a second. So a council member, one of them would bring it up, and then they'd have to get somebody else that says, hey, this is a good idea. The way it was in Capitola before this current language, it said any council member can put an item on the agenda. What that was leading to in Capitola was emails from council members to staff saying, hey, we'd like to talk about, I don't know, a Ferris wheel. And suddenly then on the agenda at a meeting, there would be an item about a Ferris wheel, and everybody would be caught a little bit off guard. And the city council at the time said, this seems weird, and we don't think we're going to go as far as the city of Santa Cruz in requiring a second, but we think you need to bring it up at a meeting. So it's at a council meeting, during council comments, say, I'd like to see an agenda item on X or Y. And then it's up to the city manager and mayor to look at the coming agenda schedule, look at the deadlines maybe associated with the ask, the workload, and what's a reasonable timeline to get it on the agenda. The other person who can put things on the agenda, city clerk and city attorney, as well as our city treasurer, who is our finance director, provided it's related to what they do. So those are basically how things get on agendas, and it's different in different cities. So if you hear in Scotts Valley that they're doing it somehow, this is how we do it. It's not fixed in stone. It's set in our Muni code. So there are a number of different ways to sort of do this kind of thing. If other people want to get something, because this is a question you may get, is how do I get something on the city council's agenda? They can direct a request to staff, they can direct a request to a council member, and then it would be up to a council member to bring it up in the open meeting. Or there's times when, somebody in the public might bring something up to say to staff, hey, look, I don't know, we say that the stop sign is falling down, and we say, you're right, we need to take it to the council to fix it. So it's possible if somebody brings something to staff. But in general, usually those are things like someone wants a dog park or they want a law changed, and usually they would work through a council member to get it on an agenda. Okay, so we talked, Sam already, I think, explained in Rosenberg's rules how the mayor or vice mayor, in their absence, presides over the meeting. We have a number of Muni codes, and so we're just going to quickly touch on these little sentences in our Muni code that govern the conduct of the meetings. They're good to take a look at every now and then because it's easy to forget them. Number one, the mayor can vary the order of the agenda. So, sometimes when staff says, we're going to get a presentation on item A and the person isn't here yet, we suggest moving it to the end of the meeting. People may say, council have to vote on it? The answer is no. The mayor can just say, I am switching the order of the agenda. Addressing the council. So this really is going through, so this is interesting. The mayor introduces public comment. The second thing is nobody may speak to the council after the motion is made unless a majority of the council agrees. This interestingly nearly came up in a recent meeting, you may remember, and it is a specific line in our Muni code, is that after this motion and second, that it's a majority of the council that a majority of the council would have to agree to have another speaker come address the council. Our Muni code also says explicitly that remarks are made to the body as the whole, and questions, people there will often ask questions. They will often ask questions of council members. They will often ask questions of staff. Our code says we don't respond. It says there's no questions except through the mayor. So the way that would work then is at the conclusion of public comment, the mayor could say to, Council Member Morgan, did you want to respond to some of the things we heard in public comment, or or do it to staff? Could staff clarify why the carousel won't work on the end of the word, for example? Okay. So then, this is always a fun one. We've done this before, but I don't think we've done it with Sam. We used to do it before Sam. Yeah, it was fun. The good old days.
You tried a few times when I got here. I shut that down.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So you. So there is a provision in the Brown Act to add an item to an agenda, and really, there's these two different ways. We don't do it very often. It would really be like something terrible is happening in the city. I think we may have done it during the floods in 2011 when, the night of a council meeting, a pipe burst, and as we're sitting down to meet, there's a river flowing down in front of City Hall.
We had to override CQuest to fix it.
Yeah.
And did maybe bypass the bidding procedures.
It was exactly something like that.
It's funny because a lot of these codes govern these state laws, which this is just based on state law, governing emergencies were written when the only emergencies that were contemplated were terrorist attacks or acts of war.
Yeah.
Or acts of God. And so there are so many other emergencies that happen so often now that the codes are getting reworked. I mean, some of the Brown Act provisions, there have been some changes since COVID, but the language still reads a health and safety or dire emergency.
Yeah. And then on both the Planning Commission and the City Council agenda, they're organized with consent items and then general government items. Consent items generally involve either more decisions that may be between the chair, the mayor, and the city manager, or the community development director. People think there's going to be less questions about. It's more routine, those kinds of things. And it's something that the city manager, I work with the mayor on, looking at an agenda, trying to figure out, is this something we should be doing on consent? How does the rest of the agenda look? Is it a topic we think is going to be pulled for discussion? That kind of thing. Okay, this is you.
This is me. So Sam has already briefly touched on public comment. We take public comment twice during our agenda process, or at least twice. So there's general public comment, which is known in Capitola as oral communications. So this is typically towards the beginning of the meeting, and it involves anything within the jurisdiction of the legislative body, so Capitola, City of Capitola. And it's an opportunity for members of the public to speak on the consent items or just general Capitola things that are not listed on the agenda in the general government public hearing section. And so during this time, people get 3 minutes each. They can come up to the council to talk about their concerns as long as it's within the jurisdiction of Capitola. Then we also take public comment on each of the general government and public hearing items, and that is required prior to the council's vote. And the comments, again, 3 minutes per person, and it has to be related to the item. So if we have an item about a carousel and someone comes up and is like, I want a dog park, that's not really the item, so they shouldn't really be commenting. They should have commented during oral communications, and then the chair can tell them, thank you for your comments, but unfortunately it's not really related to this item, and that's that. We, in our Muni Code, have a line that says, the comments are to the group as a whole, it's not to an individual council member, and it's really encouraged not to respond to public comment. It's not a dialogue between the public and the council, or the public and staff, or the public and a consultant who's presenting. It's an opportunity for people to state their piece, and then we move on. And sometimes we do have a line of people waiting to talk, and so it's really not encouraged to kind of engage in that dialogue.
I would add that our standard practice with both the Planning Commission and the Council is 3 minutes for public comment. It is within the purview of the chair, the mayor, depending on the agenda, the amount of people that want to speak, that can be adjusted. So you may have seen in other council meetings or other planning commission meetings, maybe when the chair might say, how many people are here tonight to speak about the playground in so-and-so's backyard, and the entire room raises their hand, and you say, okay, given what it looks like we have 75 speakers on this item, I'm going to request that, comments are limited to 90 seconds or less, or 2 minutes or less. So that is something that the chair, and you can manage that with either the city manager ahead of time or the community development director.
Does that 30-minute go just for the public comment at the beginning, or does it for each item also?
So the 30 minutes is what we list for oral communications by members of the public at the front end of the agenda. Mm-hmm. At the back end of the agenda, we don't have a specific sort of target time for how much public comment would push it into a shorter. That's at the discretion of the chair in the planning commission's case, or the mayor.
So you can limit public comment in two ways. You could say, I am going to take 2 hours total of public comment. So, that means that only X number of you will be able to speak. That might encourage people to organize themselves and appoint a spokesperson. That's the intent of limiting the time. Or you could say, okay, we've got 200 people, I'm going to limit it to a minute. The key is that you have to do it at the beginning of public comment. You can't do it halfway through, because you cannot do it based on the content of the comments. People have a right to criticize you. So if the comments are particularly harsh, you can't be like, whoo, okay, I'm going to limit this to 30 minutes. No, that's not a thing. It's been tried. I know.
Regularly, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. But the planning commissioner should be mindful about whether that item. I want to answer that. I assumed, and I could have been wrong, I assumed that you were talking about an item that the planning commissioner was personally impacted. I assumed you were talking about like a stop sign and the planning commissioner was next door. Okay, so a few different answers. If the planning commissioner is talking about an item that they're personally impacted on, that is fine, right? They're still a resident of the community, fine, no problem. It is still fine for them to speak as a member of the planning commission. It's not a great idea. Really, the council, there's a structure set up for you to receive information from the commission. If you're considering a zone change, a zoning ordinance, or if you're considering a project, likely the planning commission has looked at that and given their recommendation to you via a staff report. And so that's really how they should communicate with you. It's not quite appropriate.
there are situations I've seen where a board or commission may ask, basically designate the chair or another member to convey
It makes a
convey
little
some
bit
thought.
more sense coming from the other boards that don't necessarily have such an established line of
Right.
communication to the council.
Yeah. I think so. I think if you were to be doing something along those lines, unless you were designated by the board to represent the board, it would be good to say I'm representing myself here in this case, and I'm not representing the interest of the other board members. Based on our previous thing where questions are directed to the mayor.
I am a big fan of a buzzer, and at 3 minutes, we cut the mic because I do not want there ever to be an argument that you are allowing some people to go past 3 minutes and other people you cut them off. And we are all just people. And so if someone is up there for 3 minutes saying that all of you are a bunch of idiots making terrible decisions, bringing about the destruction of Capitola, our instinct might be watching that clock, and when 3 minutes is up, it's done. Whereas if someone is not saying that, we may let them go. And so my instinct is treat everyone the same.
On there.
Yeah. Well, that's. I think that could be a decent clarification. Is that
it's on there under? It's not on there under oral communications by members. It's for here.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the court says it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. We can, I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
the trick, of course, is if you get somebody who wants to talk about vaccines or 5G radiation or something, then yeah. Yeah, that's the one challenge of having a more casual approach. Because I think when I came to Capitola 16 years ago, there was a more casual approach, and it tended to work. And we've kind of tightened up the rules over time as the comments have gotten more discursive.
Yeah. The trouble with allowing people to go past the set time limit is that you are necessarily making a decision that content is relevant and that you want to hear it. We usually arrange in advance. When I am working with the city and we're doing a development project or even any large project, we'll
Yeah. So that's a great question because that does happen. And my recommendation, and I'd also like to hear the city attorney's recommendation on this one, is the best course of action is if there's something that's just egregiously false or really something that really, maybe it's even a good question. It's just something that really deserves a response. There's an easy response is let the chair close the public comment portion and then put your hand up and say, either I'd like to respond to a couple of things that came up during public comment, or ask staff, can you please reply to the suggestion that the Ferris wheel is going to be installed next week, and clarify that for members of the public.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say if someone says this is a 48 unit project and that's ridiculously large for the parcel, and it's in fact a 22 unit project, that would be an appropriate conversation.
And the reason why I recommend letting the chair or the mayor close public comment is that, for those of you who've been doing this for a while, you've seen many, many times where the person up at the podium says, it's a question, and they direct it at a council member, and they answer it, and then they get another question, and pretty soon it's sort of, it's kind of out of control a little bit. And so usually I think the best practice is let the public comment close and don't sort of engage in the dialogue in the moment. Yeah.
So the other item we wanted to talk about is how the vote is conducted. We do have language within our municipal code that specifically states that no member of the council shall be allowed to explain his or her vote or discuss the question while the roll is being called, and no member shall be allowed to change his or her vote after the vote is announced by the chair or the mayor of the meeting. And so what this looks like in practice is if we're voting on a carnival, or I'm sorry, the Ferris wheel example. So we have a motion and a second, and we've come to the roll call vote, and we're going through, and Councilmember Doe says, really reluctantly, I'm voting yes on this. I'd really prefer it if the Ferris wheel was open Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but I guess I'll go ahead and vote in favor. Well, that would be explaining their vote, and they're adding a qualifier or some type of condition essentially to their vote. And so that would be in violation of the municipal code. And so we really want to just stick to a yes or no vote. You can say yay, you can say nay, it really doesn't matter, but affirmative or negative vote with no qualifier or no discussion at the time of the vote. And then after the vote is announced, you can't immediately say, actually, I've changed my mind. You could do a motion for reconsideration following Rosenberg's rules, but that is pretty rare and has a couple of qualifiers that go with that type of procedure. And so this is what's outlined in our municipal code. We're nearing the end here. And so the last thing we want to talk about is our boards and commissions. And so as Sam mentioned earlier, as a legislative body, you have the authority to create other legislative bodies. And so we have municipal code language that kind of outlines the procedure for how to do that. And so within Chapter 2, Section 4, you'll see those numbers that are listed on the screen there all refer to our municipal code sections. And so the establishment of boards and commissions, it basically states that the council has the authority to establish boards and commissions. We have a section referring to city boards and commission policies. It's just really general, stating that we have certain policies for boards and commissions that apply to all of the groups. There is also referrals to boards and commissions, which I'll go over in just a little bit, and then use of city personnel for boards and commissions. And so really briefly, Capitola has 5 advisory bodies that are formed by the City Council: the Art and Cultural Commission, the Commission on the Environment, the Finance Advisory Committee, the Historical Museum Board, and then the Planning Commission, which is here with us tonight. And so really briefly, these are each advisory bodies or boards, commissions, committees that provide guidance and recommendations on specific topics. So each group was formed for a specific purpose, and the purpose is outlined within their bylaws. They are there to make more detailed hands-on decisions, and then they follow council direction. So the council can direct a board to do something, and then the board follows up on it, or they work on goals or work plans that they create. It's through their purposes as outlined in their bylaws. All of these groups are subject to the Brown Act, so they each have their own meeting schedules, their own agendas, their own minutes, all of which you can find on our city website or posted right outside in the lobby. These groups are each made up of really valuable volunteer community members that are appointed by the city council, and we really treasure and appreciate the active constituency that participates in our boards and commissions, planning commission included. And so with that, the code outlines a procedure for how the council can refer an item or a project to a board, commission, or advisory body for review. And so again, these are volunteer community members. It's different than assigning a project to staff at a council meeting, for example. But the council can still refer items to these bodies at a meeting, for example, if the council wanted to refer the new Ferris wheel that we're talking about to the Commission on the Environment. During the meeting, as we're talking about the Ferris wheel, the council could, by a simple majority, say, we'd like to actually refer this item for further review to the Commission on the Environment, and then the Planning Commission for review. And then it would then go to those different groups. It would be on their agendas. It would come back to the council for a recommendation after they've had a chance to review it at publicly noticed meetings. In our municipal code, we have a section about the staff liaison or staff work for city boards and commissions. So each board or commission has a staff liaison. Staff members clerk these meetings. They provide administrative support. They stay and work with the commissions. They also answer public inquiries for the meetings. Sometimes that involves volunteer work over the weekends for city events and things like that. So we really appreciate the staff members who help clerk for those groups as well. It's really valuable work. And that is the end of our slideshow, unless Jamie has additional comments.
I was just going to make one comment about the referral to boards and commissions. This is a relatively new addition, and it came about because we had some comments from members of the public asking the city to do something, and I don't remember if it was the mayor at the time. One council member said, "We'll go talk to such and such commission about that," and that commission then spent months researching the topic and staff supporting them and doing all this work, and it just ended up generating a big project for the city, which really the city had never made a decision to actually do. So when we did kind of our sort of administrative review, we asked the city council, and they said, no, when we start asking our volunteers to start working on something, it can't just be one council member who says, go do this. It needs to be a decision the city makes, the city council.
It does seem like in some ways the planning commission is a little different because there are a number of state laws that apply to the planning commission, like when can the planning commission approve a variance, and those are all spelled out, and a number of laws that are a little different.
That's 100% correct. Yeah, the planning commission, doesn't necessarily get projects referred to them the way the Commission on the Environment would, or the Commission or the Art and Cultural Commission. The planning commission has a statutory role in approving and reviewing certain kinds of permits, and reviewing the zoning code and making a recommendation before the city council makes changes, or making recommendations to changes to our general plan. So it is different with the planning.
The slide that you had, that they had the bottom three items, that blog, cell phone use, and one other item. What's the, it seems like the cell phone use has been the latest issue brought up by the community. You said that was going to be reviewed and stuff. Is there going to be a time frame on that? It seems like that's one that is pressing. And
yeah, it's a definitely.
I mean, we're being scrutinized very heavily about that, and so I was wondering what's the time frame to trying to address that and having a code of conduct for that for our council.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that. I think it would be a good idea in general. We don't use our phones on a dais because of what it looks like. It looks like we're not paying attention, except for emergencies. I mean, there's always going to be that exception for emergency. Yeah. But if we could refrain from using them, I think that would be a great practice.
We can definitely bring that update. It's not a complicated update. I think this is something that honestly this meeting kind of brought out, is we were looking at all these different policies and realized that we had some that were dated. So, looking at city clerk, I think it's probably something in April we can do. Yeah.
I don't mean to complicate things, but you don't need a policy to do
well,
that.
That's true.
The council could just decide that you're not going to use your cell phones on the dais, and the commission could just decide that you're not. I mean, the enforcement of the council violating a council policy is the council decides what to do, right? I mean, you are your own bosses.
Yeah, again, it's just a bad look. But again, there's always going to be an emergency that you might have, something going on in the city that we need to know about.
Right. Yep. We have to text mayors that. I mean, that's really the kind of stuff that, where sometimes, texts with me are privileged, but, sometimes I'll get questions. So that's really what I think is useful for. But the council, you don't need us to come back to the house and for you to decide not to use your cell phone.
I agree to that absolutely, because there is instances where maybe reading a piece of paper and then the public may perceive that I'm reading text message and I'm reading a piece of paper and it's for a PRA based on that. And it's ridiculous and a waste of money. So I support not using phones on the diets.
So if someone, a lot of us use like an iPad, because we read the agenda on there, we receive it electronically and go through it. And there's been an instance where someone has sent me a comment, not that I asked for it, because, it popped up saying, don't approve that project, it's way too big and large. So we're then obligated to say that we got that comment.
I don't know what your commission does. I don't. I know. I don't know if you have. Are you asking if you would have to disclose it in? Do you have a section before your items where you talk about ex parte communications?
We don't really. This is going on during the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Not so much now, but it was definitely happening during COVID and stuff. Somebody would text you or send you an email, which on all of our devices pops up and says, there's an email from Jamie Goldstein that says the building's way too big.
So that would be subject to a record request.
Right.
All of those communications. Right. I mean, if we get asked for a records request that captures that communication,
We also have a administrative policy about additional materials, which so any email that's sent to the group as a whole is considered additional materials to the agenda. And if it's received before the close of the public comment period, it would be added to the agenda packet, even if it's happening during the meeting. And so sometimes we'll update agenda packets the next day. And same thing, like if a member of the public was to, during public comment, bring papers, and then we distribute those papers to you during the meeting, we retain a copy, and that copy becomes part of the agenda packet the next day. We scan it in, we upload it. And so as long as it's received before the close of the item's public comment, then it's considered public comment on that item, and it becomes part of the record. If it's an email directly to you, it does not fall under the additional materials policy definition, and that would just be a constituent email to an appointed official or elected official, and it's not subject to the agenda packet inclusion.
So just following up on that, I think it sounds like the council feels that way. Would that be the same thing that we would then pass down, that we would hope that that's the same expectation for our planning commission? Okay.
It is listed in the code of conduct, which applies to both elected and appointed officials. There's a section, I believe it's section 5 point something, that refers to attentiveness at meetings and the expectation that our elected appointed officials are attentive at the dais. And so it is outlined in that policy as well. And so if we were to revise the outdated administrative policy about cell phone usage, it's already covered within another administrative policy. So I don't know if it needs to be its own separate policy.
Well, that concludes what we had planned for you this evening. So,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Meeting adjourned.
I'm going to have dinner.